Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take a look at this thing here. This is one of the latest devices from the guys at iSDT. Now we've already looked at lots of iSDT devices here. We've looked at the Q6 Plus smart charger, some of the bigger chargers they have as well, and some of the small kind of pocket sized devices for doing things like checking your LiPo batteries. And some really smart stuff that actually allows you to monitor signals coming out of S-bursts as well as do all your battery checking too. And so far I've been really impressed with all the iSDT stuff. It seems to work very well. It seems to be reasonably bulletproof. And this FD-100 is all about discharging the batteries rather than charging them. So if you're like me and when you go to the field you have a couple of 1300 4S batteries, you have a couple of 3S 2200 batteries, you have a couple of 4000 milliamp hour 4S batteries for the bigger planes, you have some little batteries too for the smaller quads, you don't necessarily get to discharge all the batteries during the flying day, depending on weather, tide, traffic and crashes. So occasionally you're coming home and you have batteries that need to be discharged. Now a lot of the chargers that we've already looked at have a discharge or storage function that will take the battery down to about 3.8 volts, but they tend to take a little bit of time, and that's because when you're discharging a battery and pulling enough current to get the power out of the battery and get it down to that safe level, you generate a lot of heat, and a lot of chargers take their time with that and manage the heat so they don't get into trouble. This thing is pretty much 90% a heat sink and a fan with some electronics on the top. So the idea is it can absorb all that power and dissipate all that wattage as heat and discharge the battery a lot quicker. Now this one came from Banggood.com. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. It's about £28. Maximum discharge for this thing is about 80 watts, although you can set it from anything from 0.5 amps to a 6 amp discharge. You have to tell the charger how many cells you're discharging because it doesn't have a balance port, and once you've got that set up, after a short pause it'll start discharging and away it goes. But it will automatically limit itself to an 80 watt discharging capacity. Now the idea is when you initially plug it in, it'll ramp up to the maximum current that you want to use, so long as it doesn't take it over the 80 watts maximum, and then as the battery starts to discharge, it gently decreases the current that it's taking, and also does that if the actual unit itself starts to get blooming warm. Now if you set it for something like 6 amps straight away, then the fan pretty much comes on as soon as you hit go, whereas if you have a smaller current rating, as the chassis starts to warm up, then the fan kicks in to try and keep everything cool. The heatsink inside this is huge, and it's connected to two big, what look like power MOSFETs or something like that. So there's an awful lot of surface area to dissipate the heat, and there needs to be. If you think about how hot a 60 watt incandescent bulb gets, you can see exactly how much heat this thing is potentially having to shift. Once it's discharging, then a little green light is flashing away, and it will manage itself until it gets to the end. The little green light in the middle that says status will go solid, and it will beep a handful of times, and then all the lights and LEDs will go off. Now unfortunately when mine arrived, I found that the fan was actually broken. It didn't turn at all. Even connecting it directly to a voltage source didn't give me any joy at all. It was completely dead, and that meant that the very first time I used this, it started to get hot, and it continued to get hot, and it got very, very hot. It was only that kind of smell of warm electronics that let me know that something horrible was going on. So I had to burn my fingertips to unplug the battery and then stick it outside and let it cool down. Now the 20mm fan is pretty standard, so I replaced it with another one, and then it's been working fine ever since. To change the settings in this, I've had a couple of goes but kind of given up. You need something like the smart charger from iSDT, or you need to use the SC linker cable. Again, that's something that you can get from places like Banggood, and everyone seems to have them. I would personally recommend, if you're going to buy one of these, or you're going to get into a lot of the iSDT stuff, get yourself one of these linker cables. The latest iSDT stuff seems to be coming with a USB cable. Hooray! But the older ones that have this horrible 3.5mm jack, it's handy for the sake of a couple of quid to get hold of one. So after living with this thing for 3 or 4 weeks, what do I think? Well, I like the idea of an easy way to discharge LiPos. It certainly discharges them a lot faster than putting them through a normal charger on a storage setting. The solid construction is really nice. It feels like a very solid, meaty piece of equipment. And then it needs to be, because 90% of it is that heatsink and fan assembly, and it needs all that metal to help dissipate the heat in operation. And it kind of works, but I'll asterisk that, and let's talk about the stuff I'm not a fan of, no pun intended. I don't like the fact it doesn't have a balance port. It does stop on a balanced battery when each of the cells is about just over 3.8 volts here, and that's perfect for a storage charge. I'm very happy with that, and you can change those settings and the working temperature using the smart charger or the application and the special cables. But I personally would have liked a balance port on this thing, so if one of the cells had been a little bit unhappy during one of the flights, that it isn't going to be pulled below that 3.8 volts as part of the discharge cycle, that additional safety would have been very welcome. I don't like the fact it doesn't have a screen. Having just a series of little LEDs works, but you know what? I like to see what's going on. I like to see how much current it's actually pulling, and I like it to actually tell me what the temperature is. Now, I might be a little bit sensitive about this because that first time I used it, it did get incredibly hot. But I'd just like a display that gave me some confirmation that everything was working fine and there wasn't an issue at all. In my humble opinion, there should be some way to sense that the fan is working or not, and if it isn't working, the unit should shut down. And again, that kind of feature is obviously missing. So for me, this is the first piece of iSDT equipment that I haven't been really impressed by. I'm sure others will review it and not have the same kind of problems that I've had and not have an issue with it at all. But I'm afraid my faith was shaken right from the very start. And even though it's working, I'm always very cautious of it, and I'm making sure that I'm keeping a very close eye on it and listening out for the fan starting whenever I use it now. But if you're looking for a way to discharge your batteries faster than using your standard LiPo battery charger, then have a look at this. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release 1 or 2 extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.